The sun was just starting to sink behind the wide hills when Caleb Hargrove rode back to his ranch. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and pink, and the wind carried the dry scent of dust and grass. Caleb was old now, with gray hair and a face marked by years of sun and hard work. His hands were rough and his back ached, but he still rose early every morning to care for the land he had loved all his life. The ranch had been in his family for generations. It was a quiet, lonely place now. His children had grown and moved to the city, chasing lives that had little to do with the open fields and long trails. His wife had passed away some years ago, leaving him with only memories and the silence of the house. Caleb's days had settled into a routine. He would rise before the sun, feed the horses, check on the cattle, and repair fences that had weakened in the wind. The land was his companion, but it could not speak or laugh or offer comfort in the long evenings. He often sat alone on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the hills, wishing sometimes that someone would share the quiet with him. He did not want a family around him to make trouble or complaints. He only wanted company, a gentle presence to ease the loneliness. One day the town preacher came riding over the hills to see Caleb. He was a kind man, always concerned about the people in his flock. "Caleb," he said, "I think it's time you had some help. You're too old to manage all this alone. There's a young woman, a good soul, who can work here. She'll cook, clean, and help around the ranch." Caleb frowned. He was not used to having anyone around him besides the horses and cattle, but he nodded slowly, realizing the preacher was right. A few days later, a young woman arrived at the ranch. Her name was Eliza May. She was shy and small with a gentle look in her eyes. Her hair was dark, tied back neatly, and she carried herself with quiet caution. She did not speak much at first, and when she did, it was in a soft, hesitant voice. Caleb watched her closely. There was something about her that reminded him of the days when his wife had laughed in the kitchen or sung softly while tending to the house. Eliza began her work immediately. She swept the floors, cleaned the windows, polished the wooden furniture, and started preparing meals. She had a careful way of moving around the house, making sure nothing was out of place. Caleb noticed how she worked silently, never complaining, never asking for more than necessary. She would sometimes hum a soft tune while washing the dishes, a melody so faint that it could almost be mistaken for the wind outside. Caleb had never seen anyone like her. She was quiet, yet there was a strength beneath her shyness. It was as if she carried a heavy burden but chose to carry it gracefully. The old rancher found himself respecting her, even though he didn't fully understand her story. He kept his distance at first, unsure how to approach someone so reserved. He had spent most of his life alone after his wife's passing, and the thought of a stranger in his home was unfamiliar and strange. Days turned into weeks. Caleb and Eliza developed a routine, though still a silent one. She would wake early, light the fire in the kitchen, and prepare breakfast. Caleb would sit at the table, drinking his coffee in silence while Eliza moved around the room with quiet efficiency. She never looked directly at him unless spoken to, but her eyes would occasionally flicker with curiosity or concern. Caleb noticed the small gestures, a dish placed carefully, a loaf of bread baked just right, the neat folding of his clothes. It was the care in her work that spoke volumes, even when her lips remained mostly quiet. Sometimes Caleb would watch her from the doorway, leaning on the wooden frame. He saw how she handled the animals gently, speaking to the horses and cattle in a soft, soothing voice. She had a natural way of connecting with them, earning their trust without raising a hand. The ranch, which had always been a place of hard labor and discipline, seemed to soften with her presence. Even the dogs, who were wary of strangers, approached her with tentative steps, tails wagging slowly. One evening, after a long day of checking fences and rounding up cattle, Caleb sat on the porch. The sky was deepening to a dark blue and the first stars were appearing. He saw Eliza walking along the path carrying a small basket of laundry. She stopped briefly, placing the basket down, and looked at the sky. There was a quiet wonder in her gaze, as if she were discovering the beauty of the world for the first time. Caleb felt a warmth in his chest he hadn't felt in years. It was not love in the way one feels for a partner, but a deep appreciation for someone who brought life and care into a lonely house. Eliza noticed Caleb on the porch and gave a small, shy nod. He returned it with a soft smile, the kind that came from years of life experience and quiet observation. That night, after the fire had burned low in the hearth, Caleb heard her humming again. It was a melody he could not place, but it reminded him of gentle days long past. He realized that her presence was changing the ranch, bringing a sense of calm and warmth that had been missing for too long. Over the following days, Eliza began to show small signs of trust. She would ask Caleb about the land, about the animals, and sometimes even about his past. He told her little at first, keeping his memories close, but her patient listening encouraged him to share. He spoke of the long winters, the cattle drives, and the joys of raising children who had now grown and left. Eliza listened quietly, never interrupting, offering a soft word or a nod when appropriate. Caleb began to notice other small details as well. She would leave fresh flowers on the windowsill, picked from the wild meadows near the ranch. She folded his shirts with care, made sure his boots were polished, and sometimes left notes with reminders for chores or the weather. It was in these small acts that Caleb felt a connection forming, a bridge between two lives that had known very different struggles. Evenings became a time of quiet companionship. Caleb would sit in his old chair by the fire, reading a book or simply staring at the flames. Eliza would move about the room, cleaning or preparing the next day's meals, humming softly all the while. Sometimes she would pause and sit nearby, reading her own small book or sketching something she saw outside. Caleb respected her space, never forcing conversation, but simply sharing the room and the warmth of the fire. As the days passed, Caleb found himself looking forward to her presence. The ranch did not feel so empty anymore. The silence that had once weighed heavily on him was now filled with gentle sounds of life. The creak of her boots on the wooden floor, the soft clinking of dishes, the faint hum of her melody. It reminded him that life could still hold beauty, even in quiet moments, and that companionship came in many forms. Caleb also began to see a quiet courage in Eliza. She carried herself with dignity despite her shyness, moving through the world with a gentle but firm resolve. It was clear she had known hardship, yet she faced each day with care and determination. He respected her not only for the work she did, but for the strength she showed without ever raising her voice or demanding attention. By the end of the first month, the ranch felt different. The fences were repaired more efficiently, the animals were calmer, and the house felt alive once again. Caleb would sometimes pause in the fields and look back at the home, seeing Eliza moving about inside, and feel a deep sense of gratitude. She was not just a maid, she was a presence that brought life, warmth, and hope to a place that had almost forgotten what those feelings were. Though Caleb did not fully understand her past or the reasons for her quiet demeanor, he realized that her presence mattered more than questions or explanations. In her silent way, she had become part of the ranch, part of the daily rhythm of his life, and part of the comfort he had long missed. And in return, Caleb offered her respect, safety, and the kind of steady companionship that only years of life experience could provide. The sun set again over the hills, and Caleb and Eliza went about their separate tasks, each aware of the other, each finding comfort in the quiet, shared life of the ranch. In the vast expanse of the Wild West, where days were long and nights could be lonely, the presence of another human being, even a quiet, shy one, could make all the difference. And for Caleb, for the first time in many years, the ranch no longer felt empty. The first signs of autumn were in the air, when a quiet storm of emotions began to stir on Caleb's ranch. Eliza moved through her daily chores with steady determination, but her soft eyes sometimes betrayed a shadow of something more. A worry, a memory, a fear she kept carefully hidden. Caleb had noticed it on several evenings when she paused at the edge of the barn or stood silently by the fence, staring out toward the hills as if seeking answers from the wind itself. He said nothing, understanding that patience and respect were better than questions that might frighten her. One evening, a sudden summer storm rolled over the hills, darkening the skies with thick rolling clouds. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, hammering on the tin roof of the barn and splashing into the dust that had settled around the ranch. Caleb had finished checking the fences for the day, his old hands sore from hours of labor, and he was just about to head inside when a faint sound reached him. It was a soft, trembling noise, almost drowned by the storm's roar. Curious, he followed the sound to the kitchen, where he found Eliza sitting on a chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes were wet, and she was trembling as if the rain outside had reached her very heart. A small locket, tarnished with age, rested in her palm. She had opened it, revealing a faded photograph inside, a memory she carried but rarely spoke of. Caleb stood silently for a moment, unsure if he should speak. He had learned in his long years that some stories could not be rushed, that trust took time to grow. "Are you all right, Miss Eliza?" he asked finally, his voice gentle but steady. The sound of his voice made her flinch slightly, but she looked up at him with wide eyes. There was fear there, yes, but also something else. A cautious hope that perhaps he would not judge her for the past she carried. For a long while, she said nothing. Then slowly, almost in a whisper, she began to tell him her story. She had once worked in a grand household in the town nearby, for a wealthy rancher's family. Life had seemed hopeful at first, a place where she could earn a living and live in safety. But the rancher's son had grown cruel over time. He demanded things from her that she could never give, and when she refused, she was cast out, left with nothing and nowhere to go. The memory of that day was sharp in her mind, the humiliation and fear still fresh despite the months that had passed. Caleb listened without interruption, his old eyes softening with understanding. He had seen cruelty in his own life, though of a different kind, and he could sense the strength it took for her to survive and continue forward. When she finished, her voice barely audible, he placed a calloused hand on hers. "You did what you had to do to survive. That's no shame," he said quietly. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that only experience and compassion could give. Eliza's shoulders relaxed slightly. She had expected anger or judgment, perhaps even indifference. Instead, she found understanding, a quiet recognition that her courage had not gone unnoticed. She placed the locket back into her pocket, but the tremor in her hands remained for a while. Caleb did not rush her, letting her regain her composure in the calm of the firelight and the rhythmic pounding of rain against the roof. From that evening on, a subtle shift took place in their relationship. Caleb found himself checking on her more often, bringing her tea or a warm blanket when the nights grew chilly. He did not say much, letting his actions speak. Eliza, in turn, began to show small signs of trust, a smile here, a question there, a fleeting look of comfort when she moved about the kitchen. The ranch, which had been quiet and orderly, now felt a sense of shared life, as if the walls themselves had relaxed in response to their growing companionship. One morning, after the storm had passed, the air smelled of fresh earth and wet grass. Eliza walked toward the barn, her boots leaving wet imprints in the soft ground. Caleb followed, noticing how she approached the animals with patience and care. She spoke to them gently, her voice barely above a whisper, coaxing the horses to move and calming the cows that had become restless in the storm. He watched as she worked, marveling at her quiet strength and her ability to handle situations with such care and skill. "You've got a good way with them," he said at last, leaning against the barn door. His voice was warm, carrying both observation and a hint of admiration. Eliza paused and looked up, her cheeks flushing slightly. She nodded but did not speak immediately, as if words were still unfamiliar to express the connection she felt with him. Days turned into weeks, and the trust between them deepened. Caleb began to share stories from his own life, tales of cattle drives, long winters, and days spent mending fences under scorching sun. Eliza listened, absorbing each word, occasionally asking questions in her soft, cautious voice. She asked about the ranch, the animals, and even the history of the land. In her questions, Caleb sensed curiosity, intelligence, and a desire to understand the life she had stepped into. Eliza, in turn, began to reveal more of herself. She shared small details, her favorite way to make bread, the songs she liked to hum, and the little routines she had developed to keep the house running smoothly. Caleb noticed the gentle care she took with every task, how she arranged the dishes, folded the clothes, and even swept the floor with an attention that seemed to honor both the home and the people who lived in it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb found her on the porch looking out over the fields. She was holding a small bouquet of wildflowers she had gathered, the delicate colors bright against the deepening dusk. He approached slowly, careful not to startle her. She glanced at him briefly, then returned her gaze to the horizon. "They're beautiful," Caleb said softly, nodding toward the flowers. She smiled faintly and placed them in a small jar on the railing. It was a small gesture, but it held meaning, a sign that she was finding comfort and a sense of belonging in this place that had once been only his. Caleb realized that her presence was not just helpful but transformative. The ranch no longer felt empty. The house no longer felt quiet in a lonely way. There was life here again, brought not only by her work but by her quiet, steadfast heart. Eliza had begun to feel a sense of security she had not known in years. For the first time, she could rest without constant fear of judgment or danger. She moved through the ranch with growing confidence, caring for the animals, tending the house, and even assisting Caleb with tasks he could no longer manage easily. Her shyness remained, but it was tempered by a quiet pride in the work she was doing and the trust she had earned from the man who had taken her in. One rainy afternoon, while Caleb repaired a broken fence near the edge of the pasture, he glanced back at the house. Eliza was in the kitchen preparing a meal, her movements calm and precise. The light from the window reflected off her dark hair, giving her a soft glow in the gray afternoon. Caleb felt a warmth in his chest, a feeling that had been absent for years. She had brought life, care, and quiet joy back to a home that had almost forgotten what it meant to feel alive. The rain eventually stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean. Caleb and Eliza went about their chores, each aware of the other, each finding comfort in the shared silence and the steady rhythm of work. It was not friendship in the ordinary sense, not yet. It was something deeper, a mutual respect, a quiet understanding, and the beginnings of trust that neither had known they needed. As night fell, the stars appeared one by one, twinkling in the dark western sky. Caleb sat by the fire in the living room, reading from his late wife's journal, and Eliza moved quietly about, tending to the kitchen. The sounds of the fire, the occasional creak of the floorboards, and the soft whisper of her humming filled the house. Caleb realized that in her presence, the loneliness that had once been so heavy no longer pressed down on him. The ranch was alive again, not because of the work done, but because of the gentle presence of another soul who cared. Eliza paused for a moment, glancing at Caleb. Their eyes met briefly, and there was an unspoken understanding between them. She had come to the ranch shy, hesitant, carrying memories of hardship and fear, yet here she found safety, respect, and the chance to heal. Caleb, in turn, had opened his home to her, offering not just shelter but trust, kindness, and the quiet warmth of human connection. And so, life continued on the ranch, slow and steady, filled with small gestures of care, silent companionship, and the growing bond between an old rancher and a shy maid who had quietly changed the rhythm of his world. The sun set over the hills again, and the night carried the promise of tomorrow, where work, laughter, and gentle trust would continue to knit their lives together in the quiet heart of the Wild West. The peaceful rhythm of the ranch began to change one afternoon. Caleb was out checking the northern fence line when he noticed a dust cloud rising in the distance, approaching along the main trail that led to the ranch. At first he thought it might be some travelers or ranchers passing by, but the shape of the riders and the way they rode with purpose made him uneasy. Something about them told him this visit would not be ordinary. He paused, squinting against the afternoon sun, and noticed their hardened expressions and loud shouts. Back at the house, Eliza was in the kitchen, sorting through dried herbs and preparing a small meal. She heard the sound of hooves pounding the dirt and glanced out the window. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a group of men riding up with a determination that immediately alarmed her. She recognized one of them. The same young man she had mentioned in her story, the cruel son of the wealthy rancher who had forced her to leave his household months ago. The memories that had stayed buried for so long surged up, and her hands trembled as she clutched the counter for support. Caleb walked briskly back to the house, his long strides covering the ground quickly, despite the ache in his joints. He had seen anger, threats, and danger before, though not in years. Yet this moment filled him with a mixture of caution and protective instinct. He stepped onto the porch just as the men reached the gate, their horses kicking up dust and mud. "Where is she?" the leader demanded, his voice harsh and commanding. "The girl that ran from my father's house." "We know she's here." Eliza shrank behind the barn door, hoping that somehow the men would leave without finding her. Fear gripped her chest, but she also felt a flicker of hope. Caleb was here, strong and steady, and she trusted him to protect her. The old rancher's eyes narrowed as he studied the men. Though age had slowed him, his instincts were sharp. He had been a rancher and a veteran, used to standing his ground. "These hills belong to me," Caleb said calmly, his voice steady. "No one comes here to cause trouble. You best turn around before it gets ugly." The men laughed, their horses stomping impatiently in the dust. "You don't know who we are, old man. You'd better hand her over or you'll regret it." Caleb's hands rested on the wooden rail for a moment before he reached for his rifle, his movements deliberate. The sound of metal against wood seemed to carry a weight of authority. "I said leave now." For a moment the men hesitated, sensing the determination in his stance. Caleb had always been known as a man of quiet strength, the type who did not speak much but whose actions demanded respect. Yet these men, fueled by arrogance and entitlement, were not accustomed to being denied. The tension hung heavy in the air, broken only by the low growl of the wind through the fields. Eliza watched, frozen behind the barn. She could see the seriousness in Caleb's eyes, the calm before the storm. She wanted to move, to speak, but fear rooted her in place. She had trusted herself to survive before, but now she trusted Caleb even more. She had never felt a sense of safety like this, a feeling that someone would truly stand up for her. After what seemed like an eternity, the leader spat on the ground, frustrated by Caleb's resolve. "We'll be back," he said with a sneer. "You can't hide her forever." With that, the group turned their horses and rode back down the trail, leaving a trail of dust and anger behind them. Caleb watched them go, his heart still pounding. But he did not lower his rifle immediately. He waited until the dust had settled and the sound of hooves had faded into the distance. Then he finally let out a slow breath, lowering the rifle to his side. Eliza stepped out from her hiding place, her legs trembling as she approached him. I didn't want to bring danger here," she whispered, her voice small and fragile. Caleb placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You didn't. It wasn't your fault. Some people are foolish and cruel. But you're safe now. I won't let anyone harm you on this land." His voice carried the weight of experience, of someone who had faced hardship and come through stronger. That night, the storm that had threatened the ranch earlier returned, not in wind or rain but in quiet reflection. Eliza moved about the house with purpose, cleaning and tidying, though her mind was elsewhere. Caleb watched her, noting how she carried herself despite the fear still lingering in her eyes. He admired her courage, the way she could face danger and yet continue to care for the ranch and the house. They ate dinner in silence, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Caleb occasionally spoke of mundane matters, the weather, the chores, the health of the animals. But there was a quiet understanding between them. They did not need many words. The shared experience of the afternoon, the threat and the relief, had created a bond that went deeper than conversation. The following days brought a renewed sense of vigilance. Caleb reinforced the fences near the edges of the property and checked the gates more carefully. He kept a close eye on the trails leading to the ranch, watching for any signs of trouble. Eliza assisted quietly, moving about the ranch with her usual care, yet there was a tension in her posture, a readiness born from knowing the past could return at any moment. Despite the lingering fear, life on the ranch began to settle again. Caleb noticed that Eliza had grown more confident in her movements and decisions. She would guide the horses without hesitation, feed the cattle with practiced efficiency, and even assist him in small repairs around the house. Her shyness remained, but it was tempered by a growing sense of purpose and trust in the life they shared. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Caleb found Eliza by the fire, folding laundry. She looked up briefly and gave a small, shy smile. Caleb nodded in acknowledgement, feeling a warmth in his chest that he had not felt in years. This quiet companionship, born from mutual respect and shared hardship, was becoming the heartbeat of the ranch. Caleb realized something important. Life on the ranch had always been about hard work and solitude, but now it was also about connection. Eliza's presence had changed the rhythm of his days, filling the spaces that had once been empty with care, trust, and quiet courage. He found himself looking forward to her simple gestures, the way she left flowers on the windowsill, the way she hummed while sweeping, the careful way she tended to the animals. Each act, no matter how small, reminded him that the world still held beauty and kindness. Eliza, in turn, began to feel a sense of belonging she had never known. The ranch was no longer a place she had wandered into out of necessity. It had become a home, Caleb's steady presence and quiet strength gave her the confidence to face the shadows of her past. She moved through each day with growing ease, knowing that she had an ally who would protect her, respect her, and value her not for what she had endured, but for who she was. One evening, as the stars began to appear in the clear western sky, Caleb and Eliza stood together on the porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of distant pine and freshly turned soil. The ranch lay quiet beneath the twinkling sky, the animals resting after a long day. For a moment, they simply watched the world in silence, each drawing comfort from the presence of the other. Caleb thought about the challenges they had faced, the storm, the men, the fear that had briefly gripped the ranch. Yet he also thought about the strength that had emerged, not only in him but in Eliza. She had faced danger, uncertainty, and fear, yet she had continued to care for the ranch, the animals, and him. Her quiet bravery reminded him that courage often came in the smallest, most unassuming forms. Eliza felt the same way. She had come to the ranch shy and hesitant, carrying memories that still stung. But here, in this quiet home on the wide plains, she had found safety, purpose, and trust. Caleb had given her more than shelter. He had offered a sense of belonging that she had not thought possible. As the night deepened, they retreated indoors, each feeling the quiet bond growing between them. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the house, once filled only with silence, now resonated with the unspoken understanding that they were no longer alone. Life on the ranch had changed. The threat of the past still lingered, but it was tempered by the trust and care that now defined the relationship between Caleb and Eliza. Together, they faced each day with quiet determination, each drawing strength from the other, and though they did not yet speak of the future, both felt that, for the first time in many years, they had found a measure of peace in a world that could be harsh and unpredictable. The days passed slowly on the ranch, each one marked by the rhythm of chores, the changing weather, and the quiet companionship between Caleb and Eliza. The sun rose over the rolling hills, painting the land with golden light, and the wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of wildflowers and dry grass. Eliza moved about the house and yard with a steady calm, yet beneath her soft, shy exterior, a storm of emotions had begun to take shape. She had grown close to Caleb over the weeks, yet she had not dared speak openly of the depth of her feelings, fearing both her own vulnerability and the reality of their differences in age and experience. Caleb, too, felt a shift within himself. The old rancher had spent much of his life alone, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and remembering days long gone. He had grown used to solitude and the quiet rhythm of his land. But Eliza's presence had brought something he had not anticipated, a warmth, a sense of life, and a connection that stirred memories of love long past. He did not speak of it, not yet, but he found himself noticing her in small ways. The way her hair caught the light in the morning sun, the careful way she handled the animals, the gentleness with which she moved through the rooms of his house. One late afternoon, after a long day of work in the fields, Caleb felt the strain in his body. Years of labor had left him with aches that no amount of rest could fully erase. He had been checking the fences when he felt a sharp pain in his chest, forcing him to lean against the wooden post for support. Eliza, who had been tending to the animals nearby, noticed immediately. Her heart jumped and she rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she reached for him. "Caleb, are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling with genuine concern. He shook his head slightly, wincing but managing a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine. Just need a moment," he said, though his breath came in shallow gasps. Eliza would not be reassured so easily. She insisted he sit down in the shade of the barn, helping him to a chair while her hands carefully adjusted his coat and wiped the sweat from his brow. Caleb felt a mixture of gratitude and unease. He had spent so long being the caretaker, the strong one, and now he found himself in need of care from the young woman he had come to trust. As he rested, Eliza spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll do anything for you, Caleb. Anything," she said, her words trembling with sincerity. Caleb froze, the words echoing in his mind. He had heard declarations of loyalty before, but never spoken with such quiet, earnest emotion. Her gaze met his, and he saw the truth behind her words, the courage it had taken for her to admit her feelings, the care she felt, and the depth of her loyalty. He could feel the weight of her promise, not as a demand but as a gift freely given. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of the earth and the distant sound of the river. Caleb's mind wandered to memories of his late wife, to days when the house had been filled with laughter, warmth, and love. He realized that Eliza's words were not just an expression of loyalty. They were a bridge between the past and the present, a reminder that connection and care could still exist in a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving. Eliza, sensing the pause, shifted slightly, her hands still resting gently on his shoulders. She had expected fear, rejection, or confusion, but she found only quiet attention, a stillness that spoke louder than any words could. Caleb's eyes softened as he looked at her, seeing not just the shy maid who had arrived weeks ago, but a brave, caring soul who had chosen to stand by him despite fear and uncertainty. You don't have to do anything you don't want to," Caleb said finally, his voice low and measured. "I appreciate what you said truly, but your courage isn't measured by promises. It's measured by how you live, how you care, and how you choose to be kind." Eliza's cheeks flushed, a mixture of relief and emotion warming her features. She nodded, understanding that her words had been received with respect, not judgment. The firelight of the setting sun glinted against the barn walls, casting a warm glow over the two of them as they sat together in companionable silence. The days that followed were marked by a renewed closeness between them. Caleb began to rely on Eliza not only for practical help, but also for emotional support. Her quiet presence brought him a sense of peace, and he found himself sharing stories he had never told anyone. Tales of his childhood on the ranch, of his days working cattle drives across endless plains, of the love he had lost and the lessons life had taught him. Eliza listened, never interrupting, occasionally asking soft, thoughtful questions that showed her curiosity and care. In turn, Eliza began to reveal more of herself. She shared memories of her past, the hardships she had endured, and the small joys that had carried her through lonely nights. She told him of her love for the wildflowers that grew along the hillsides, her fondness for music that made her hum softly while working, and her simple dream of living a life filled with purpose and trust. Caleb listened with quiet admiration, understanding that her strength lay not just in her work, but in her resilience and gentle heart. One evening, as the sky deepened into shades of purple and gold, Caleb and Eliza walked together along the edge of the pasture. The air was cool, carrying the scent of the earth after a brief rain. Caleb pointed out landmarks on the horizon, telling her stories of cattle drives, long winters, and the challenges of maintaining a ranch in the wide open West. Eliza listened intently, occasionally glancing at him with eyes that reflected both awe and respect. "You've lived a full life, Caleb," she said softly, "and yet you still carry the strength to protect this land, to care for it, and to help others." "It's remarkable." Caleb smiled faintly, his weathered face softening. "Life teaches you things," he replied. "Mostly about patience, resilience, and the importance of kindness. You've got more strength than you realize, Eliza. I see it every day." The sun dipped below the hills, leaving a sky full of stars. They returned to the house in silence, each carrying the quiet understanding that their bond had grown beyond words. It was a connection built on trust, respect, and the shared experiences of life on the ranch. As night settled over the land, Caleb and Eliza moved about their separate tasks, yet both felt the comfort of the other's presence. The house no longer seemed empty, nor the ranch quiet in a lonely way. The soft hum of Eliza's melody as she worked, the gentle creak of floorboards under her feet, and the warmth of her care had brought life to a place that had been still for too long. Caleb thought often about the afternoon when Eliza had whispered her promise. Her words had been a revelation, a sign of trust and courage. He understood that her loyalty was not given lightly, and that she had chosen to stand by him not because of fear or obligation, but because of a bond that had grown naturally, quietly, and without pretense. Eliza, too, found a sense of peace she had never known. The ranch was no longer a place of uncertainty or fear. It had become a home, a sanctuary where her efforts were valued, her presence respected, and her heart free to feel without judgment. Caleb's acceptance and quiet care gave her the courage to face her own fears, to embrace her place in the world, and to live fully in the moment. Days continued with the same rhythm: chores, animal care, and the quiet companionship that had blossomed between them. Yet beneath the ordinary tasks, a sense of anticipation and quiet emotion lingered. Both Caleb and Eliza sensed that something had shifted, that their relationship had deepened in ways that words could not fully express. There was an unspoken understanding, a recognition of the value they held for each other, and a quiet hope for the days to come. One night, as they sat by the fire, Caleb looked at Eliza and saw not just a maid or a helper, but a brave, loyal soul who had chosen to trust him. He felt a deep gratitude and a rare sense of happiness that had long eluded him. Eliza, in turn, felt the warmth of his care, the strength of his presence, and the comfort of knowing she was valued, protected, and understood. In the heart of the Wild West, where days were long and nights could be lonely, the bond between an old rancher and a shy maid had grown into something remarkable. It was not yet love in the conventional sense, but it was a connection built on trust, loyalty, and the shared understanding of life's hardships and joys. And for both of them, that connection was enough to bring hope, peace, and the quiet promise of a future filled with companionship. The ranch, under the wide open sky, seemed to breathe again. The wind carried their quiet moments, their laughter, and their trust across the fields. The animals thrived under their care, and the house glowed with life that had been absent for so long. Caleb and Eliza, side by side in their work and in their quiet moments, found in each other a bond that could withstand the challenges of the world beyond the hills. And in the stillness of the night, as the stars shone brightly above, both understood that the words whispered that afternoon, "I'd do anything for you," had not only revealed Eliza's loyalty but had also awakened a sense of connection that would shape the days, months, and years ahead. The promise, soft and unassuming, had become the foundation of a trust that neither had expected but both cherished deeply. The morning sun rose over the hills, painting the ranch in warm shades of gold and amber. Caleb stood on the porch, his weathered hands resting on the railing, watching the animals graze peacefully. For a moment, he allowed himself to think that the danger from the past had passed completely. The men who had come seeking Eliza were gone, and weeks had passed without incident. Yet deep down, a cautious part of him remained alert. He had learned over the years that the West could be unpredictable, and that threats often returned when least expected. Eliza moved quietly through the yard, tending to the horses and feeding the chickens. Her movements were calm, confident, and careful. She had grown stronger over the weeks, not just in her work, but in her sense of belonging. The ranch was no longer a place she simply inhabited out of necessity. It was home. She had learned the rhythm of the land, the habits of the animals, and the ways to anticipate Caleb's needs before he even asked. Despite her growing confidence, a small trace of unease lingered. The memory of the men and the fear they had inspired was still fresh, a shadow that reminded her to remain vigilant. Suddenly, the sound of hooves pounding the dirt trail reached their ears. Caleb's brow furrowed, and his hand instinctively went to the rifle leaning against the porch railing. The dust cloud rose in the distance, and his heart sank. The men had returned. This time there was no hesitation in their approach. They rode with purpose, their faces hard and determined. Eliza froze, clutching the edge of the porch, her chest tight with fear. Caleb stepped in front of her, standing tall despite his age and the aches in his body. "Stay behind me," he said firmly, his voice calm but commanding. "I'll handle this." The men rode up to the gate, shouting and demanding Eliza be handed over. "We know she's here," the leader called, spitting on the ground. "We want her now." Eliza's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel fear clawing at her, but something inside her shifted. She thought of Caleb, the man who had protected her, trusted her, and shown her kindness when the world had turned its back. She realized that running or hiding was no longer an option. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and stepped beside Caleb. "You'll have to go through me first," she said, her voice steady, though it trembled slightly with emotion. The word surprised even her. She had never spoken like this before, with such courage and determination. But in that moment she knew she would protect Caleb, the ranch, and the life she had come to cherish. The men sneered, laughing at her boldness, but Caleb's eyes were steady. He had fought many battles in his life, both literal and figurative, and he could see the truth in Eliza's stance. She was no longer a frightened girl. She was a person who had faced fear and chosen to stand with strength and loyalty. Caleb placed a hand gently on her shoulder, offering silent support and reassurance. Before the confrontation could escalate, the sound of hooves approached from another direction. The sheriff and a group of deputies rode into the clearing, their presence commanding and decisive. Caleb had sent word to the town when he sensed the men were planning to return, and help had arrived just in time. The leader of the group cursed under his breath, realizing their advantage had vanished. "We'll be back," he threatened, though the confidence in his voice was shaken by the sight of lawmen and by Eliza's unexpected courage. The men were quickly surrounded, and there was no choice but to surrender. Caleb lowered his rifle, relief washing over him. He turned to Eliza, seeing the mixture of fear and pride in her eyes. She had stood her ground, faced the threat without hesitation, and shown a courage he had long admired. He placed a hand on her arm, giving a small approving squeeze. "You did well," he said simply, his voice filled with genuine respect. The sheriff handled the men, taking them into custody and ensuring that justice would be served. Caleb and Eliza watched as they were led away, the tension in the air slowly dissolving. For the first time in many weeks, the ranch felt completely safe again. That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch together. The wind was calm, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant river. The animals had settled and the house was quiet, filled only with the soft sounds of domestic life, a kettle boiling, the gentle creak of chairs, and the quiet hum of Eliza's voice as she tidied the porch. "You were brave today," Caleb said, breaking the silence. His eyes met hers, filled with warmth and admiration. "I've never seen anyone face danger the way you did." Eliza's cheeks flushed, a mix of embarrassment and pride. I just didn't want anything to happen to you," she admitted softly. "You've been so kind to me, Caleb, I couldn't let them hurt you." Caleb shook his head slowly, a small smile on his lips. "It wasn't just me you were protecting. You were protecting this land, this home, and most importantly, you were protecting yourself. That's courage, Eliza. True courage." The words settled between them like the calm after a storm. Eliza felt a warmth in her chest, a sense of validation and belonging she had never experienced before. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear but the choice to act despite it, and she had chosen to act not for glory, but out of loyalty, care, and the love she felt for the life she had found on the ranch. Over the following days, life returned to its peaceful rhythm. The fences were repaired, the animals tended, and the house kept in perfect order. Caleb and Eliza worked together seamlessly, each respecting the strengths and skills of the other. They shared quiet conversations in the mornings, discussing the weather, the crops, and the routines of the ranch. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes speaking, sometimes simply enjoying the presence of the other. Eliza continued to grow in confidence. She moved through the ranch with purpose, tending to the animals and performing chores with efficiency and care. She no longer flinched at every sound in the distance, no longer carried the heavy weight of fear in her chest. She had found safety, belonging, and trust in the most unlikely of places, a ranch in the middle of the West, and a man who had opened his heart to her without judgment. Caleb, for his part, found a renewed sense of life in Eliza's presence. Her courage, care, and quiet strength had brought a light into his days that he had thought was lost forever. He found himself looking forward to their mornings together, listening to her soft hums while she worked, and seeing the small, thoughtful touches she added to the house and the land. The ranch was alive again, not just with animals and work, but with trust, companionship, and the gentle rhythms of shared life. One afternoon, as they walked along the edge of the pasture, Caleb paused to look at Eliza. The sun reflected off her hair, and the wind played gently with the loose strands around her face. "You've changed this place," he said quietly. "Not just the work you've done, but the way you've made it feel like home. You've given life back to this ranch." Eliza smiled softly, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. "I didn't do it alone," she said. "You trusted me, Caleb. You gave me a chance. That made all the difference." The words hung in the air, simple yet profound. For the first time in many years, both Caleb and Eliza felt a sense of completeness. They had faced fear, hardship, and uncertainty, and together they had found courage, trust, and a sense of belonging. As the sun set and the stars appeared in the western sky, Caleb and Eliza returned to the house. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. They shared a quiet meal, spoke softly of their day, and prepared for the night. Outside, the ranch lay calm and peaceful, the animals resting, the fences secure, and the land safe once more. In that quiet moment, both understood something important. Life on the ranch was more than chores, cattle, and fences. It was about connection, trust, and the quiet courage to stand for what mattered, and in each other. They had found a bond that would endure, a companionship built not on fear or obligation, but on respect, care, and the shared experiences that had brought them together. Eliza sat by the fire, folding the laundry and humming softly. Caleb watched her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and contentment. The house was alive, the ranch was thriving, and their hearts were filled with a sense of peace they had both longed for. The hardships of the past, the threats, and the loneliness had been met and overcome, leaving them stronger, closer, and more aware of the value of trust and courage. And so, life continued on the ranch, steady and calm, filled with work, quiet moments, and the unspoken bond that had grown between a shy maid and an old rancher. Together they faced the future with confidence, knowing that they could rely on one another, protect each other, and share in the joys and challenges of life on the wide-open land of the West. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a testament to the quiet courage and enduring loyalty that had brought them together.